Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome. Welcome to Copyright's Clearance Center's Town Hall. This time it's going to be fireside chat style. We're going to be looking at bridging innovation and integrity, a discussion of responsible AI practices. I'm your host, Roanne Levy, licensing and legal advisor at the Copyright Clearance Center. And we're really glad you've been able to join us today in such great numbers for this really important conversation about responsible AI. Our goal is to help you leave this session with a practical understanding of responsible AI and actionable steps to implement or enhance your organization's responsible AI practices. Importantly, we'll also briefly explore the often overlooked role of copyright and licensing in responsible AI development, deployment, and use. So who is the Copyright Clearance Center? We are a not-for-profit organization that has been around for over 45 years. We're experts in navigating the complexities of copyright in the digital age. We provide licensing solutions that simplify copyright compliance, enabling businesses to access and share content legally and ethically. And this is especially critical in the world of AI, where vast amounts of copyrighted material may be used for training, fine-tuning, prompting, or RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Our annual copyright license, for example, facilitates responsible AI use by covering a broad range of internal uses of lawfully acquired copyright material. To guide us through this discussion, we are very, very fortunate to have Oliver Patel with us. Oliver is the Global Enterprise AI Governance Lead at AstraZeneca, where he tackles the real-world challenges of implementing ethical AI principles on a daily basis. His diverse background in academia, government, and the private sector provides him with a unique and invaluable perspective on the nuances of AI governance. He's also actively shaping best practices through his contributions as AI governance faculty for the International Association of Privacy Professionals, the IAPP. Over the next hour, Oliver will share his expertise on what responsible AI truly means, how to balance the drive for rapid innovation with ethical and responsible considerations, and the vital role that copyright licensing plays in the responsible development and use of AI. We'll explore the practical steps organizations can take to build robust AI governance frameworks, and we'll look ahead to the exciting and sometimes challenging future of this transformative technology. Welcome, Oliver, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this fireside chat with the Copyright Clearance Center. It's really an honor and a privilege. And hi to everyone joining online in the virtual town hall. We can't see you. We don't know how many of you are there, or at least I can't see that information right now. But thank you so much for coming. Really, really happy to speak with you all today. And I'm looking forward to getting into the discussion.
So, Oliver, let's start with your personal journey. Like, what brought you to AI governance? What are those experiences that shape your perspective?
Well, yeah, so I'll start sort of 10 years ago or so when I was studying. I can't say that I've worked in AI governance for 10 years because no one can. It hasn't really been a field or an industry which has even had jobs for 10 years. But I'll take the story back to when I was in grad school studying philosophy and public policy at the London School of Economics. I was always really interested in philosophy, and as a kid I was always asking the bigger questions and the deeper questions, and kind of annoying my parents in that respect. But in grad school I was first exposed to the debates around philosophy of mind, consciousness, what is the nature of consciousness, what is the nature of intelligence, and how and whether and how can intelligence and human consciousness be replicated in machine form and in digital form. So I was first exposed to that set of issues. And then I was also, because it was a philosophy degree and an ethics degree, I was also first exposed to really interesting topics around things like autonomous vehicles and the trolley problem, and also just how to sort of distribute resources fairly within society, and how to treat and assess whether different beings have sentience and how to treat those beings based on their sentience level. So all of that kind of took me down the AI rabbit hole several years ago. And then since then, I sort of started off my career in academia looking at primarily data, so data policy, data privacy, data sharing. I spent several years doing policy research in that area, then joined the UK government. And then it's only in the past sort of 3 to 4 years that I've been able to really apply my knowledge and interest in AI in a sort of practical setting and in this AI governance field. And that's kind of taken me to where I am today. But I do feel genuinely lucky and privileged to be able to work on issues that I find to be interesting and meaningful. And as we're going to talk about, I do think that despite all of the changes and everything that's happening right now, this topic of AI governance still remains one of the most important and defining issues of our time. And I think that history is gonna prove that.
Thank you. And so now you're with a global pharmaceutical company. You're leading their AI governance approach. Can you give us some example of, first, let's just start with the basics. What are the kinds of AI uses that AstraZeneca is making? And what are the governance frameworks? Like, what does that look like in action?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'm happy to share more about that. So I joined AstraZeneca just over 2 years ago to establish and implement our enterprise AI governance capability, which was a sort of totally new thing at the time, building upon work that had been done in one part of the business, but kind of scaling it up across the enterprise. And what I would like to say at the outset is that AstraZeneca, for those who don't know, it's a global pharmaceutical company with over 90,000 employees, sort of present all over the world. And AI, it is a game changer, but it doesn't fundamentally change AstraZeneca's business or mission and the focus on ensuring patients have access to life-changing medicines. So that remains the same. That's as it always has been. But what has changed is AI enables us to fulfill our mission more efficiently, more effectively. So rapid advances in the field of AI, for example, are really revolutionizing how work is done at AstraZeneca. And is enabling us as an organization and the sector at large, it's not just AstraZeneca, the whole pharmaceutical and life sciences sector, to push the boundaries of science, to deliver better medicines and treatments more quickly to more patients. So really, there's no one sort of use case or area that is particularly AI enabled or is particularly strong with AI innovation. It's every constituent part of the drug discovery and development process can and is in some way being sped up, optimized, or refined to essentially speed up and quicken the process of delivering these life-changing medicines to patients. So this could be early stage drug discovery, such as using AI to help identify the best molecules to develop, or to predict safety profiles of those molecules. Or then if we look a bit further down the line, when we get closer and closer to the patient care, we're also building sort of disease management platforms which help healthcare professionals to diagnose, monitor, and treat patients. So because there's such a strong healthcare focus, that's why the focus on AI governance and responsible AI is so important, because there's a huge opportunity to improve patient outcomes with AI, but there is also a huge responsibility for us to do so in a way that is safe, secure, ethical, and really keeps the patient at the heart of everything that we do.
So maybe when after we've spoken a little bit about what are the principles, the core fundamental principles of AI governance, you could share a little bit more about what it looks like at AstraZeneca as an example for people. So let's go to the basics, really. What does responsible AI truly mean? What are the core principles? What are the things that people need to think about when they think about responsible AI? Help us break it down into some component parts that we can actually wrap our hands around.
It's a big question for sure. You could spend many years probably defining what responsible AI is, and sort of you could do a whole PhD on that. So this is just my 2 cents. I don't think there's any such thing as, agreement on exactly what all of these terms mean. But the way I like to look at it is I like to think of AI ethics or ethical AI, responsible AI, and then AI governance as 3 separate but interrelated concepts or sort of notions. So ethical AI or AI ethics is really at the most fundamental level looking at how we can do the right thing in the context of our use and development and deployment of AI. So it's just around how do we ensure that ethical, human-centric approach is at the center of everything we're doing with AI. And that's essentially no different really to any kind of notion of ethics distinguishing right and wrong and figuring out what the best course of action is in order to optimize the right outcome and minimize the wrong outcome. So then responsible AI gets a bit more practical in the sense that it's, or a bit more, let's say, detailed in the sense that it's all about the core set of values and principles which enable us to actually achieve ethical AI. So it's slightly less foundational. It gives us more of a sort of a guide to what does it actually mean to be ethical? What are those core principles? And many organizations and governments have been on that journey where they started off by realizing, okay, there are important ethical issues in the context of AI. And then they sort of came together, especially from sort of 2018, 2019 onwards, to decide and agree upon what are the core principles and values that enable us to actually achieve ethical AI. And that's, I think, where this kind of concept of responsible AI come from. These classic kind of responsible AI values such as fairness, transparency, accountability, all of these things. And I think AI governance came next after we did the work to define and agree upon those core values and principles of responsible AI. Then attention turned to, okay, how do we actually implement those in practice? How do we ensure that in the context of everything we're doing with AI, we're actually developing, deploying, and using AI in a way that is aligned with the principles of responsible AI, which ultimately help us to achieve ethical outcomes and to promote ethical practices. So AI governance is more practical, it's more operational. And the way I like to look at it is it's all about how do you operationalize AI principles or responsible AI principles into practice, especially in the context of an organization. It doesn't have to be a large organization, but I think AI governance is quite sort of organization centric in the sense that most professionals working in this space are figuring out how do we actually ensure that the organization we work for is actually adhering to the responsible AI principles that it should be adhering to. So that's just my 2 cents on it. But would love to hear the views of others on what is a hotly contested topic, no doubt.
Can you share a little bit from a practical perspective? So responsible AI is about the core values and principles. AI governance is the specific practices and policies and processes. Give us some examples, maybe in the context, not necessarily of AstraZeneca, but of a business. How do you translate these values of fairness or transparency? And how do you connect those to the business itself? And then what are those governance kind of practices and policies, the framework that help you put them in action and then be able to execute on your values and principles?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. So I'll try and take these points one by one. So what I've really been focusing on for the past few years, and it's really become a kind of the core focus of mine, is figuring out how do you actually put in place an AI governance framework that is going to work at scale in the context of an organization that is developing and deploying AI at scale and has a sort of insatiable appetite for AI, which I think in the context of healthcare is the right way to be because of all the opportunities to improve patient outcomes. So this has really been my bread and butter for the past few years. How do you kind of take these responsible AI principles and operationalize them? So I can share a bit about some of the frameworks that I've used and developed that have helped me on that journey. So first of all, there's the kind of the how, and then there's the what. So I'll start with the how, which is my framework for AI governance professionals and how they can be successful in their role. Because if you don't have the right people doing the right things in the context of driving forward this work, it's going to be really difficult to put in place these new structures and processes and sort of initiatives that need to be put in place. So I've got my 5 Ps for AI governance success framework. The first P, sorry, 6 Ps for AI governance success framework. The first P is principled. So core values and ethical principles of responsible AI need to underpin everything that you do and need to be sort of underpinning and driving why you do what you do, how you do what you do, how you come across, and what you prioritize and focus on. So that's the first P, principled. The second P is people first. So this is really an acknowledgement that AI governance is primarily a change management piece. It's not a technical piece. It is, of course, very much relevant and technical controls and technical considerations are super important. But at its heart, AI governance is about people. People develop AI, people use AI, people are impacted by AI. Therefore, AI governance needs to win over hearts and minds of all of those people and steer their behavior and their cultural attitudes in the direction that is sort of beneficial for the AI governance program of work. The third P is proportionate. So this is really important, especially in the context of a sort of large enterprise or a company that wants to move quickly on AI. So AI governance doesn't and cannot mean governing all AI. There will be some people on this call that may work in organizations where they have like a load of people doing AI governance. What I found is that is not the norm. Maybe in some financial services companies, maybe in some big tech companies, but in the vast majority of companies, and I've trained and discussed this with a lot of people, it's one person, two, three, maybe four, five, maybe 10, 15 if you're lucky. So there's no point trying to wrap your arms around absolutely everything. You've got to be selective, and you've got to put your energy and resources where it can have the most impact. And that's why taking a risk-based approach is really key. And that's also why taking a risk-based approach is at the heart of the AI regulations, like the EU AI Act. We're not trying to govern absolutely everything just because it has a machine learning model as part of its architecture. The fifth P is persistent. So that's really important because it can be quite draining doing this work. So you have to be persistent, you have to be patient and resilient, especially in the early days, because it is a long journey. And then finally, the 6P, pragmatic. So, and this is probably the most important one, realizing and showing appreciation that the risks of not using AI and the risks of not adopting AI can be greater potentially than the risks of using AI. So this is, I think, and this is my belief, that this is especially the case in healthcare and life sciences, where we have an opportunity to significantly improve patient outcomes, for example, through earlier detection of all sorts of diseases and conditions. And going back to my sort of ethics background, I believe that it would be unethical to not explore and to not see how we can use AI to detect cancer more quickly and earlier, for example. So therefore, not using AI, not adopting AI is also risky. And AI governance professionals shouldn't just focus on the risks of AI, of course, although of course that is a core part of what they do. So those are my 6 Ps. That's the how. I can talk about the what as well, which is the framework, but I think we're going to come on to that in a second.
Yes. So these principles are in tension with the need to innovate, the feeling that I think a lot of us have that, you know, we're going to fall behind if we don't like jump in with both feet with AI. And what I'm hearing is we need to be thoughtful. We need to be deliberate about how we do this. We really need to understand what our values and ethics are as an organization and how the use of AI may impact our employees and our customers and our supplier. And we need to put in place and assess our values against the influence that generative AI will have on them, and then put in place a framework so that we stay true to our values. And this is not just from an organizational culture, but from a societal perspective as well. Is that a fair kind of summary of, before we actually go to operationalize it, the kind of the strategic consideration that we have to have about how we implement, especially generative AI, but all AI, into work?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So you need that buy-in first. You might not get buy-in for absolutely everything, but you need the kind of senior leadership of your organization to be on board with this journey for it to have any chance of success. And you really need to have those core values or responsible AI principles, whatever you want to call them. I think they also should be agreed first. Now, that doesn't have to be a kind of huge exercise, but if you have a sort of senior leadership or a kind of organization that is just fundamentally does not see this as aligned with what they're trying to achieve, then it's going to be really difficult to make any progress. So the 6 Ps that I outlined just now, they're more relevant for the kind of AI governance practitioner doing this work. But I would agree that as a prerequisite, you need an organization and a senior leadership in particular that at the very least is bought in and supportive at a high level with this agenda. Now, in terms of the actual frameworks, what does an enterprise AI governance framework look like? So there are 5 core pillars. The way I kind of structure it, 5 core pillars for enterprise AI governance. And so this is more the what. What do you actually need to put in place? So you need, obviously, underpinning the kind of AI ethics or responsible AI principles that you've hopefully agreed and aligned on as an organization. The first pillar is you'd have your sort of AI policies and standards and sort of other documentation such as SOPs and guidelines that really set out the rules of the game in your organization for AI development, AI procurement, AI deployment, AI use, and then going into more detail where needed on specific topics and specific issues or processes. So over time, this probably becomes sort of relatively comprehensive package of documentation and materials that really sort of is the company law on AI, shall we say. Then the second pillar is you have your sort of core AI kind of risk assessment or AI governance assessment processes. This is obviously how you will review new AI use cases and projects and initiatives or models to ensure that they are adhering to the policies and standards and the requirements you've set out in those. You'll also be tracking the regulations and ensuring that the updates in the regulations are reflected in your risk assessment process and in your policies and standards. The third pillar, which is kind of often not as discussed, but probably among the most important, is having an operating model that actually supports the implementation of the AI governance process and the implementation of these policies at scale. So you need to figure out who is actually going to do this work, who's responsible for driving this agenda, reviewing new projects, supporting the business, first, second, third line of defense, all of that stuff. And ideally, that is at its heart, you have some kind of AI governance or AI ethics board, which would probably end up having different subgroups or sort of associated groups on a topic by topic basis. You then have your technical controls, so sort of AI inventory. There's many different ways you can do this, but it's really impossible to have any kind of meaningful AI governance without keeping track of and recording your AI use cases and applications and models. Now, and it's also going to be virtually impossible to comply with AI regulations without doing this, because they all require you to be aware of what you have. So you cannot really do that without the right tooling in place. And then finally, the fifth and final pillar, the one that I'm the most passionate about, is AI literacy. So education and training to support that change management and to support that cultural change. Your policies are worthless, your processes are worthless if people do not understand them, are not aware of them, and do not believe in them and believe in the importance of them. So I think that do not overlook the importance of AI literacy and bringing the company on the journey with you. So I went over the how, which was the 6 Ps, and then the what is this kind of 5 pillars of enterprise AI governance. Obviously, you need buy-in. And what I would say on that is that buy-in, yes, what you say matters, but buy-in really comes from what you do rather than what you say. Anyone can sort of make a presentation and sort of outline why AI governance is important. But what you really want to do is you want to, in the early days especially, you want to run a process that is effective, that is meeting the needs of the business, that is credible, because that's actually how you'll get buy-in, by sort of proving the value and the worth of what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You mentioned 6 principles, but I think you might have just gone through 5. So people first, proportionate, persistent, pragmatic. Was there a 6th one, or?
Let me double click on that. Perceptive. I forgot. You're right. It's a good spot. I did forget.
It was someone on the call actually was counting.
Yeah. So there's a reason why I forgot it. It's because it used to be 5, right? And then a really helpful commenter once just kind of recommended a 6th one, and I totally agreed with it. So it became 6. But in my head, it's just been these 5 for ages. But yes, the 6th one is perceptive. So what that is all about is speaking the language of AI and data science. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't think you need to be an advanced coder or software engineer to lead an AI governance program, but you need to understand what the technical community are working on. You need to have empathy with them. You want to be able to understand what tools they're using, what projects they're working on, what challenges they face, what kind of pressure they're under to deliver. So being perceptive means really engaging with the technical community and especially the AI and data science community in your organization with curiosity, with empathy, and to foster that shared understanding. Because the worst is when the governance world kind of silos itself off from the technical world. It is hard to keep up to date with all this stuff. It requires a lot of ongoing learning and research. But I think if you have that kind of curious spirit and that mindset of collaboration, it's going to serve you well, I think, in this kind of work. So yes,
So,
perceptive. Yes. Sorry.
so we mentioned a couple times already the tension between innovation and responsible and thoughtful use of AI. It's all about risk, which you said, risk-based approach to AI governance as well. Let's dig in a little bit more about the risks. What are those risks that organizations that are implementing AI and generative AI in particular need to be aware of and make sure that they are tracking and managing?
Unfortunately, there's quite a few, so that it makes the work quite challenging, and it really does depend. So before kind of diving into some examples, it is always going to depend on the nature of your organization. So the jurisdiction you operate in will determine your regulatory or legal risk. Obviously, if you're operating in the EU or if you're selling AI products or services into the EU or the outputs of your AI systems are used in the EU, then of course, just compliance with the EU AI Act is a key consideration, and non-compliance also becomes a key risk. We also now have the Product Liability Directive in the EU, which applies to AI as well. The EU's AI Liability Directive was actually dropped or withdrawn recently, but there is still the Product Liability Directive. So there are different ways in which an organization can be subject to regulatory challenge and legal challenge, especially in the EU. So if you're kind of going to the boardroom or speaking to senior executives about this, that is going to be a risk that they're particularly concerned about. There's a lot to do to kind of achieve or work towards achieving EU AI Act compliance. So it is quite a big program of work that has to be undertaken in a lot of organizations. The 5 pillars and the 6 Ps I mentioned earlier helps you on that journey, but there is a lot to do. So yes, depending on where you're operating, regulatory compliance, and in particular EU AI Act compliance is important. But it's not just about the EU. It's not the only game in town. Now, obviously, we know in the US we have the shifting sands of US AI policy. Things are changing very quickly, so we don't expect there to be any kind of federal AI governance law, anything like the EU AI Act. But we will see more state laws. I'm sure of it. We've already seen laws in California, Colorado, Utah, other states probably that I'm not recalling. And then China is super interesting because China has actually also adopted several AI governance laws, which are being taken quite seriously by the government in China for sure. So, and what's interesting about these laws is that they are having different policy objectives, I think, ultimately to the EU AI Act. So a lot of the kind of Chinese AI governance laws are in particular focused on generative AI services that are released to the public, as well as AI systems that generate sort of deep fake or deep synthesis, as they call it, content. So you've got to really make sure that if you're building products that are used in China, that you're also compliant from that perspective. So that's one broad set of risks: regulatory compliance and kind of legal risks. Of course, another set of risks is reputational. So more and more, we're seeing sort of AI in the spotlight and algorithms or chatbots going rogue and leading to unwanted attention for an organization. So I would say that that's becoming quite a real risk. The more that we have chatbots or Gen AI applications or even agentic AI applications embedded into things like customer support, marketing, personalizing interactions, whatever it may be, the more we have this risk of like something going wrong and very much happening in public. But also in more sort of, let's say, serious contexts like healthcare, like financial services, where AI is increasingly being used to augment and potentially even automate decision making, there are very real world impacts and risks that can affect individuals. It can affect their finances. It can affect their recruitment or their job prospects, or how they're treated, or when they're treated, or all these kind of things. So the more we're using AI in these high risk or critical domains in ways that can have a material impact on individuals, the more important AI governance becomes. So obviously the risks for organizations are legal, regulatory, reputational, and financial and commercial risks for not applying responsible AI and not getting AI governance right. And then, of course, there's risks to individuals, groups, and wider society who could potentially be harmed by AI in different ways, whether it's through the amplification of biased decision making in important arenas like law enforcement or recruitment, or whether it's through AI being increasingly embedded in sort of real world and even physical world applications like robotics or machinery or vehicles, and then that can obviously potentially lead to malfunctioning or safety concerns. So yes, there's a lot that could be said about this topic. I think we have different resources like the AI incident database. MIT also have an AI risk repository. These are tracking like thousands of different examples of real world harm or AI risk materializing. So it's quite difficult to distill it into like your top 5 or 6 points, but all organizations are going to care about legal, regulatory, reputational, commercial, and financial risk. But equally, and perhaps at the top of that list is going to be the risk of falling behind competitors, the risk of not innovating and not keeping up with the market, and then not offering products or services, or not delivering in a lean enough way in line with how the market is progressing. So of course, in the boardroom and at the C level, that's probably the top AI risk that they're concerned about, which is why I go back to the point around AI governance professionals need to be cognizant of that, because otherwise they're just going to be misaligned with their business strategy. And that's always a recipe for disaster in any governance context.
So that's back to that tension between wanting to innovate rapidly and being responsible and thoughtful on how to do it. So you mentioned some AI risks and legislation and regulations that kind of deal at the high level AI. But what I'm seeing a lot is that the stuff that we've been dealing with forever as businesses, the risks there have to be recontextualized. And often organizations are not thinking through what does confidentiality means? How do we protect confidentiality when our employees are perhaps using ChatGPT, for example? What are we doing with personal identifying information? How do we take this to the next level in order to ensure that we protect that? Just as an example, just yesterday, my daughter was telling me that she asked ChatGPT for information about herself. And she was stunned to see the information that came back about things that she didn't think was even out there in her digital footprint, like what intramural teams she was on at university, what student bodies she was participating in, things that are nowhere on her LinkedIn profile or even on a resume that she may have given out to a potential employer. So it's absolutely the ability of generative AI to connect information that before previously was difficult to connect or wasn't done easily when you just Google search, takes the risk around that kind of information, and in all businesses are dealing in information to the next level. But let's talk a little bit about copyright and licensing. We've been working together in preparation for this session. You just published today a Substack piece on copyright and AI, and I encourage everybody to have a read of it and to subscribe to your Substack, which is very, very informative. The motto at the Copyright Clearance Center is that responsible AI starts with licensing. Tell me more about your thoughts about this, and as you put together this Substack piece on copyright, what would you like to bring forward to the audience today?
it's really complicated. That's I think the challenge with AI governance is that you kind of have to end up dealing with every topic under the sun. One day it's privacy, the next day it's content creation and deep fakes, the next day it's cybersecurity, and today it's copyright. So it's a very interdisciplinary field. And I was kind of reading into the history of copyright and how, yes, we've had these technological changes such as TV, radio, the internet, but actually with AI, something fundamentally new is happening, whereby these models are being trained on data, but actually also have the ability to very closely or entirely replicate the data they've been trained on in the content that they generate, which is not something that I guess historical sort of iterations of like the tools that were processing content for text and data mining were doing. So I found it fascinating going into that whole debate. I'm not going to sort of comment on like the specific legal debate around fair use, because there are much greater experts on that topic at the Copyright Clearance Center and elsewhere. But my main takeaway from all of this is just how important AI literacy is. So like I live and breathe AI governance. I've been in doing this for a few years now. I've got a decent understanding of the copyright issue, and I found it really hard to get my head around all of this. So if you just think about like the just normal average member of your organization that doesn't really think about AI governance, they probably don't really think about copyright. They're just basically trying to do their job efficiently and productively with the tools that they have available to them. And they need to understand in really simple, actionable terms what they can do and what they can't do. There's no room for ambiguity. There's no room for vagueness. It needs to be actionable, practical, simple, clear guidance. And I think that just kind of diving into this debate around copyright and seeing, okay, you could be infringing in the context of training, but it's like maybe or maybe not. You could be infringing in the context of RAG, but it's not 100%. You could be infringing in the context of fine tuning, but again, it's not 100%. You could be infringing in the context of inputting a prompt or a document, but it always depends on what country you're in, where the data's from, whether that data was licensed. And even when we know all of that, we still don't know how all of these cases are going to play out, these kind of dozens of court cases that are currently ongoing. So it's really tough, I think, from an AI, it's a tough challenge from an AI literacy perspective, because I think that was my main takeaway. So I'm now thinking, okay, what are the best and most effective ways we can really put out that clear communication? But certainly when it comes to the general use of AI tools, it's really important to educate people across the organization that they cannot, it's not just a free-for-all. Just because you have access to something, just because it's there and available on the internet, does not mean you can just kind of input it into an AI tool as a prompt or as a kind of other kind of input. So I think that we just start simple, start there, and then kind of build out. But yeah, my main takeaway is that copyright just highlights the AI literacy challenge that everyone in AI governance is currently dealing with.
Yes, and as you pointed out, it's across the AI system or the AI lifecycle, right? From training to prompting to fine-tuning to RAG. We see the use of data, the importance of data, and we see the need for training about whether that's proprietary data, confidential data, right? Data you don't want to see out there for the AI to re-put together in somebody else's output, right? So you've got your own proprietary data that you want to protect, and you want to be careful about the protected data, protected content, the copyright protected that you're using of others as well, to make sure that you've got the right rights to use it in your AI system. So we talked a little bit about the overall governance, the elements. Now, let's say we've got some folks on the call today that are just starting out, okay? They don't have all the resources. They don't have 5 people working on AI governance. They've maybe been tasked to like, could you do this like in a responsible, thoughtful way? And they've got to like wrap their heads around this and got to get started from somewhere. What are the kind of practical advice? What's the practical advice that you have for this person that is starting out, right? Maybe they're starting to allow ChatGPT or Gemini or Anthropic or another AI to be used by some of the employees, and but nothing has been done yet, right?
Mhm.
They've just said, okay, we'll start using X. What should they do?
Yeah, well, I was in that position a few years ago, so hopefully I can kind of share something useful. I think that, first of all, take a deep breath. Don't get overwhelmed because there's a lot to do, but there's also time. Not everything has to be done at the same time. Not everything can be done at the same time. So that's why I spoke about persistence as one of the 6 Ps. It is a long journey, and the 5 pillars, you can't implement them all at the same time, especially if you have a sort of 1, 2, 3 person team doing this. Now, I think you've got to start with people and process before technology. So that's the first point I would make, is there are, of course, technology solutions and platforms that you can use to optimize and automate and scale up AI governance. But I don't think that the answer should be just going straight to a technology solution. I think you've got to get the core team set up first. And then I think what that core team should do initially is the mapping piece. So if your organization doesn't have any kind of AI inventory, or has never mapped out how it's developing and deploying and using AI, you've got to start there, because it's really, really difficult to develop any kind of meaningful and effective AI governance framework without having that understanding of what your organization is actually doing with AI. Are you mainly buying AI? Are you mainly building AI? Is it mainly for internal process efficiency, or is it actually a core part of the product and you're selling AI? So your AI governance framework has to be tailored to your organization. But without doing that mapping piece and without building that AI inventory, how do you even know what your organization is doing with AI? So I would say that's critical to start with. And then the other piece that I think is critical that you have to prioritize kind of in your first 6 months is the kind of AI usage policy. So it's just a free for all otherwise. If your organization, if the employees do not have practical, actionable guidance on the do's and don'ts, again, it's got to be super easy to understand. What can you do? What can't you do? No ambiguity, no complexity. It's your job as an AI governance professional and team to take all the ambiguity and complexity from this interesting field and turn it into super easy to understand, practical do's and don'ts that anyone in your organization can just get within like a few minutes or even a few seconds. So given that everyone has access to AI on their laptop, whether or not it's provided by the company, you need that AI usage policy. And really the best way to actually keep people within the company network and not using these publicly available tools, which can of course present a data risk that you were mentioning earlier, is to actually offer high quality internal AI tools. So that's obviously not the direct responsibility of AI governance, but in my experience, that's the best way of actually keeping people in the internal network and keeping the data secure, is by providing best in class internal secure tools that they can use, rather than just hoping everyone follows the policy when it comes to the use of external tools. But yes, the AI inventory and the mapping piece that underpins that, and the AI usage policy, and just building out the core team, that's where I would start. And then you kind of build out across the other 5 pillars from there.
So you mentioned AI education as one of the 5 pillars, and it not being the responsibility of AI governance to put in the tools. But if you have proper AI education across the organization, there will be an awareness that to use AI responsibly, you need to be able to set it up in a way that protects your proprietary data, where people are well trained, personal identifying data, the workflows are clean and are done in an efficient way, but as well as in a responsible way. So there's a question from the audience about how do you deploy AI training when you have such a large organization like the one at AstraZeneca? What goes into it, and how do you sometimes you have training, but how do you monitor the effectiveness of that training as well?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. So first of all, it's not just like a one and done sort of like once a year training course. That just isn't going to cut it in this space. So this is a topic I'm really proud of, because actually AstraZeneca and the team that I was part of won couple of awards at the Learning Awards a couple of weeks ago for our generative AI accreditation program. So we ran this program throughout last year. We're sort of repeating and building on it this year. But we took thousands of people across the organization on a journey, not just of educating them about generative AI, not just of sort of feeding information about generative AI, but really giving them the space to learn how to use these tools, learn how to, and to a space to really come together and discuss and think about the impact of these tools on their work, on their personal lives, on society more generally. So we really wanted to create more of an empowerment program than a training program, because what we sensed, and then this is kind of the actual real data we got from this program, is that generally people are concerned, people are worried, people are skeptical about their jobs, about their ability to keep up with the changing world, about all the new skills of the future, just like how quickly AI is evolving. So through the generative AI accreditation program that we ran, yes, we of course gave the core messages and training on AI governance and responsible use, but we actually created much more of like a collaborative shared learning experience with many big workshops and live keynotes, and then smaller exercises in teams where thousands of people across the organization could go through this program that had a gamification element to it, where they could get gold, silver, or bronze depending on their kind of success and completion rate. So it created a real buzz, and I think one of the reasons why it was a big success is because it just gave people a space to come together and think more deeply about the impact of AI and what it means to be a human in the age of AI. And that was the name of the program, Thriving in the Age of AI. So I think providing this space, not just to learn, but to experiment, to collaborate, to discuss, was something that actually I was really privileged to work on it. I very much was not leading it. It was my amazing colleague, Bonnie Chook, and a core team. But I was really proud to be part of it, because I think that it was an example of best in class AI literacy. But a key takeaway there is it wasn't just training, it was much more than that. And I think that engaging people in that way was actually a more effective way of distilling our messages on AI governance than just doing sort of standard AI governance training, which of course we do as well. We have to do that as well. I'm not saying don't do that, but that was how we approached it.
You talked a lot about tools and resources. Are there people getting started wanting to know what are the tools that are available out there to help them through this journey? Maybe they're a business leader trying to understand how to do responsible AI well, or somebody who's been tasked with, okay, we're going to be using AI a lot more. All right, help us through this journey. You're it. So what should some tools and resources that they could use?
There's so many. I mean, it's difficult. It's probably too early for the shameless plug, so I'll do that at the end of the session. But that's usually like in the last minute. But I think, well, I've obviously been really involved with the IAPP. You mentioned this at the start. I've been part of their kind of AI governance professional certificate journey from the beginning, helping to develop that course. And over the past couple of years, I've directly trained hundreds of people on the AIGP course. So that's obviously that's become like the industry leading professional qualification and certification on AI governance. So for people wanting to work in this space or to sort of upskill their teams in this space, I would say that's a really, really valuable option. That's like formal certification. So it might not work for everyone, but it's certainly something that I'm involved in and would advocate for and recommend.
A couple of questions will go in because they're relevant for this part of the conversation. You talked about an audit of the AIs that what is being used, the tools that are being used. Some of the question is, how do you select an AI that is properly trained, that you feel has been responsible, and what's involved in that aspect to ensure that you are using an AI that fits with your values?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I think that it really depends on whether it's in the context of AI that another organization has developed, so the procurement piece, or whether it's around internal development. So I think that as part of your AI governance and risk process, it's really important to have different, I mean, obviously it's connected, but different tracks for procurement and development. So what you don't want is to have really robust AI governance processes and policies internally, but then to not apply the same high standards to the external organizations and AI providers that you work with. So that due diligence piece, and making sure you ask the right questions up front, and making sure that you get the right documentation and assurances up front in the context of procuring AI solutions is really important to ensuring whatever you're bringing in is meeting your values and standards. And that's becoming increasingly challenging, because actually what's happening is virtually all major software platforms are integrating and bolting on new AI capabilities and features. So you've got a bunch of, any large company will have so many different software platforms and vendors that they work with, all of whom are looking at how to kind of turn on and integrate new Gen AI features, new agentic AI features. So I do think that an important part of the procurement process has to be making sure that that is captured as well. So you're not just looking at new vendors, but you're looking at existing vendors sort of bringing in and turning on new high-risk AI features or capabilities. So that's the procurement piece. And then for the internal piece, I mean, yeah, there's a lot that we can say, but I guess if you have your values clear, you've got your policies and processes, you've got the assessment process working well, probably the final frontier that we haven't discussed is the technical controls piece. So ideally, your automate as this whole sort of program matures, you want to use automation to drive compliance by design. So whether it's automated testing or monitoring for things like drift or performance issues, or ensuring that AI systems cannot be deployed in production without the right ethics and compliance assessments. This is all something that you kind of need to think about as the program matures. But I think that for the purpose of discussion, it's probably a bit of a rabbit hole that we don't need to go down.
One of the questions that has received a lot of likes, so people would love your thoughts on, is what about the impact of AI on the environment? Shouldn't that be part of the ethical AI governance?
Yes, I mean, any way in which AI can have potentially have a detrimental or negative impact on the organization or on individuals or on wider society should be part of AI governance. I think the key question is, do we yet have a full appreciation and understanding of the exact environmental impact of AI? Because we definitely have evidence of the sort of carbon footprint of AI, as with any other sort of digital technology or computationally intensive technology. But I think there's a flip side where we probably still don't quite understand the way in which AI is going to change and reshape the world, and the impact that could also have on the environment. So that's not me saying that there is no potential negative impact, but I do think that there is a more holistic analysis needs to be done on, okay, if you have AI, for example, automating a bunch of stuff that was done before that may have taken like thousands of hours for humans to do, or if you have so many more types of vehicles and machines that may be cleaner powered because they're autonomous, it is important, I think, for us to have probably a greater understanding of exactly what that net environmental impact is. And I think that's why, I mean, it's an interesting question, because the EU AI Act, it's left out, and it's actually referenced in the Act because it was heavy campaigning to get it included as like a part of the requirements for high-risk AI systems, that they should be developed in a way that is sort of sustainable or environmentally friendly. But in the end, the EU has not mandated that, but they've referenced it as in the kind of category of things that you don't have to do, but it would be good for you to sort of keep an eye on this, which I don't know what kind of impact that's going to have. So it's tricky for AI governance because I think it's still hard to see what the full picture is, because maybe we haven't yet looked at exactly what the environmental impact could be on all the ways in which AI is changing the world. Often the companies that are developing these AI systems, we don't often get ease of access to the information about the carbon footprint, and then it's not a regulatory requirement. So I agree with the sentiment that this should be a core part of the focus. It's just hard to know at this stage exactly what that looks like operationally. So I think it's something that we probably need to think about further as an AI governance profession. What does that actually mean, and what should we do?
As individual organizations wanting to bring in generative AI into their work and operationalizing it, is there a way of bringing it in that reduces carbon footprint, for example? Like the small language models, for example, that will use less computational power than a large language model, but can be just as effective for a specific task. Maybe is ways companies can start thinking about managing their own contribution to the carbon footprint from their use of AI.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you could imagine scenarios where, I mean, it's difficult because it's really hard to, it's just hard to make the trade-off between, okay, the potential environmental impact of not doing something with AI versus if it took you a lot longer without AI,
Mm-hmm.
the environmental impact of doing that. So I'm not sure I'm qualified to really, I don't want to sort of make a recommendation that isn't science-based or isn't evidence-based, because I haven't got the answer myself. But I do think you're right that there are going to be things that companies can do. I think one of the big challenges is how much information are the sort of main AI developers and sort of foundation model providers actually sharing on this. And I do think that's where the EU AI Act comes into it, because I think in the general purpose AI model part, there is something there in terms of providers have to share information about the energy usage or sustainability criteria. So I do think that the market will probably end up demanding this. It's just really hard for organizations that are leveraging sort of large models provided by third parties without the reliable data about the impact. It's difficult to know exactly what to do. But I agree, I do fully agree with the sentiment, but I don't want to sort of sit here and offer recommendations and
Got
solutions
it. Got it.
and not, yeah.
I'm just looking at the time. We are almost at time, and I just want to one very quick last question. What is your message to the audience that as they are navigated the world of AI? What is the role that they can play in ensuring responsible AI into the future?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for joining this call. Really great to see all the comments coming through, all the excitement and buzz. And thank you so much to Copyright Clearance Center for inviting me on for this. My main message is that it's still very early days for AI governance. If you're in this field now, you are in the first generation of people doing this work. And this is going to be defining work for humanity, because AI is going to become embedded and part of absolutely everything that we do and everything we interact with in the world. So this work, I think, is really important. And we, as the sort of first generation, so to speak, of AI governance professionals over the past few years, we have the responsibility to shape what this looks like for future generations. So I wouldn't kind of downplay the significance of that. And despite there being some regulatory and political changes in tone and narrative, it may get a different name, it may get a different branding. AI governance and the stuff that we've been speaking about today is here to stay, and I don't think that's changing anytime soon.
Thank you, Oliver, and thank you to everyone that joined the call, and hope to see you as well on the next town hall. Thank you.
Thank you.